October 24th of 2022, there was a massive tsunami drill in Del Norte County. It was during this drill that our local Red Cross set up an evacuation shelter at the First Baptist Church, after which many people were left with questions about the Red Cross. Join me as I dive deeper into our local Red Cross with community volunteer leader and member of the board of directors for the Northern California chapter, Mary Dorman. But first, a little background about how the Red Cross came to be. It all started in 1859 with Henry Dunant, a Swiss businessman. During the Battle of Solferino, Dunant witnessed the carnage of war, men on both sides lying in the battlefield groaning for help. It was in 1863 that Dunant finally decided to form the Red Cross, an organization aimed to end human suffering. The idea was simple, to have a completely neutral medical service that would treat injuries on both sides of the battlefield. The Red Cross wouldn't venture over to the Americas, however, until 1881. It was American nurse Clara Barton who would do so, her having laid witness to the horrors of the American Civil War. After a trip to Geneva, Switzerland in 1869, Barton had learned of Dunant's Red Cross. Mary Dorman proved to be an extremely insightful resource about our Red Cross. After arriving on scene at the Crescent City Fire and Rescue Washington Boulevard headquarters, she began by cracking open the trailers and showing us the material to be used for setting up an emergency shelter. Within its confines were tarps, cots, medical supplies, coffee, and spaghetti. Essentially everything you need to set up a shelter. According to Mary, each trailer had enough supplies for a 50-person shelter.
What happens is typically we got a call from the county, from the Office of Emergency Services or the sheriff, that this has happened, we need a shelter set up, we're expecting this many people, and this is where we'd like you to set it up. Our dispatch makes the call down the chain. We call all of our volunteers and make sure, okay, who's available. Anybody that can shows up. We have what we call a disaster action team. They're the real heroes. They're the first ones that show up. And that's where we need volunteers. They're the ones that are going to make sure this thing ends up wherever it is we're setting up. And they're starting to pull the cots out, put the cots together, set up the coffee maker. Because as long as you got cots and a coffee maker, folks can kind of chill while you get everything else done. Ideally, what we want folks to do is be prepared to take care of themselves for 7 to 10 days. If your house is in a location that you don't need to evacuate, you stay put. You're going to be better off at home in your own bed. But have you got water? Have you got food? Have you got food for the dog? Have you got your medications? Do you have a way to keep yourself warm? You're going to be a lot more comfortable at home than you are in one of our shelters.
Mary went on to explain the types of food people staying at the shelter would eat and how the shelters can accommodate for people's special dietary conditions.
So, with food, part of that depends on how many folks were taken care of. When we did the Slater fire evacuation, also during COVID, so that changed things, everything had to be individually packaged foods. So we partnered with different restaurants around town, and depending upon how many people we needed to feed for any particular meal, we actually were able to infuse some money into the community by going and buying food from this restaurant and that restaurant. Some of the restaurants were in a position to give us discounts, which was wonderful. Porta-Pints actually put out a donation jar and ended up raising almost $1,000 for us that week.
Oh, wow.
So it's the generosity of donors is what helps us do what we do.
And a donation of $1,000, how many meals does that buy for people who need them?
It depends on the cost of the food. So on average, we probably got meals for between $8 and $10 a person. If we have access to commercial kitchens, and now that COVID is basically done, we're able to mass produce food again, that cost would come down.
And with the commercial kitchen, it's like cooking large-scale dishes like rice and stuff for people, right?
Spaghetti. Spaghetti's usually one of the first meals because it's quick and easy to feed a lot of people, and it gives them the carbs that they need. But we try to take into account different dietary needs as well, as much as we humanly can. You know, we've got a diverse population, so we were catering to vegan, gluten-free, diabetic needs.
Overall, the Red Cross Relief Centers get a diverse set of refugees with many varying needs. One need that I wondered about, however, How does bathing work in these shelters?
It depends on where we end up. Ideally, we're in a location that is ADA compliant and has showers. If not, we partner with different companies and organizations that actually have mobile showers that show up. Oh, wow. And they can be anything from a tent setup that has a big water bladder and it's attached to a generator for heat, and we go through the water bladder and more water is delivered, to a truck trailer that's fully enclosed and fully set up. It just needs to be attached to water.
Because of the Red Cross working purely off of donations, sometimes it can prove difficult to acquire funding. Sadly, our local Red Cross lost their office. As Mary stated, if the choice is between one of these relief trailers or rent for a building, we're going to choose the trailer.
It would be wonderful if we had 40 active, engaged volunteers. Right now we have about 10. Here's the perfect place to talk about volunteers. Okay. We have 2 programs that are developed to be done in schools. Prepare with Pedro and the Pillowcase Project, that are all about teaching kids what they need to do when something happens. Because again, if you teach them what to do, they're going to be less afraid when something does happen. And then they take those lessons home and they teach mom and dad. We need volunteers for that.
Okay, so is that present currently in Del Norte schools at all?
Not right now. We don't have the volunteers to do it. If we've got folks who are like retired school teachers or something, perfect way for them to give back to the community.
Mary also went into depth on how volunteering abroad works.
There are 2 different ways that happens. So taking a step back, most countries in the world have their own individual Red Cross organization. That's why we are the American Red Cross. Each Red Cross runs slightly different. In Europe, a lot of the Red Cross societies actually are the ambulance in that particular country. We are not, obviously, in this country. All of those Red Crosses are under the umbrella of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. So initially you learn and train with the American Red Cross, and if you're going within the country, once you've met certain training levels, depending upon the need that's happening somewhere else, you could say, I'm available to go. Once they need you, they send you. We just had 2 volunteers in Humboldt County who went through training specifically because they wanted to help in Florida. About 3 weeks after they did their first training, because they did everything in one day, we got the background checks done and everything. They have both already deployed to Florida and have come back after a 2-week stint.
For someone who wants to volunteer, where would they start and who do they contact?
To become one, you go to redcross.org and click on volunteer. There's a real simple form that you fill out. We do a background check because we want to make sure the people that we're putting in those places to safeguard others are appropriate for what's going on. And there are some online courses you have to do, and there is some in-person training that you do. Red Cross is all about taking care of our neighbors. And in our community especially, we're great at coming up and showing up for somebody that needs help. This is a way to show up and actually make a difference, not just talk about it, but actually do it. We have a lot of folks locally that volunteer with different organizations. Many of our volunteers wear more than one hat. But when everything happens, people come forward and go, oh, I want to help, oh, I want to help. So take the time now to get the training you need to actually help from the first minute. And we are going to be, if something big happens, there's a big chance we're going to be what's called an island of humanity. Crescent City is going to be separated from Klamath. Smith River could be separated from Crescent City. Hyuchi could be separated from everybody, and so can Gasky. What are your plans? How are you going to be prepared? Who's going to take care of who? Starts with your individual family and your individual plan, and then spreads out from there. If you join us, we can give you the skills you need, not only to take care of yourself, but take care of your community.
Thanks to Mary Dorman, we now have some insight into our local Red Cross here in Del Norte. As she mentioned, the Red Cross is desperately in need of volunteers, so if you or someone you know is interested, feel free to sign up now. For Redwood Voice Youth Media, I'm Ethan Caudill-DeRego.